I will never forget her eyes. Seated at the table, a glass of wine in her hand, my wife told me she wanted a divorce. She didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She spoke with the coldness of someone who already had another in her heart. And then she added the final blow. You will never amount to anything. My future isn't with a failure. In that instant, I felt my world crumble. Years dedicated to our life, to our marriage, turned to dust with a single sentence. And as if that weren't enough, she didn't hide the reason. She wanted to be with her lover, a man who, according to her, had more to offer. I just stared, unable to believe this was happening. The division of assets was already prepared. She had anticipated everything, consulted a lawyer, planned every detail. The apartment, the car, the financial investments, all of it went to her. For me, all that remained was the company she claimed was worthless, and a small fraction of the money in our account. She called it fair, when in reality, she was simply discarding me. What she didn't know was that in the following week, I would be in a series of silent meetings. Men in tailored suits, digital contracts, figures with more zeros than I had ever dared to imagine. Yes, my little company was about to be acquired, and not for a small sum, tens of millions. The payment in Bitcoin. While she celebrated with her lover, convinced she had won, convinced she had stripped me of everything, I was quietly securing my private keys in a hard wallet. The contract was signed, the funds were transferred, and she, the woman who believed she had come out on top, was left with nothing but the weight of her own choice. Because in the end, the real revenge was only just beginning. When we married, she claimed to believe in me. She would repeat that I was a visionary, that my startup would give us the future we dreamed of. I worked day and night, believing I was building something great. Every small victory was a source of pride, and for a time, she shared my belief. But the years passed, and success didn't arrive at the pace she expected. The bills piled up, the profits seemed too small. That's when the buyout offers for my company started to appear. Offers that, to me, weren't even close to what I believed it was worth. And I refused them all. In my mind, selling for cheap would be the same as burying my dream. I preferred to take the risk, to keep betting, to believe that our breakthrough was just around the corner. But to her, this was delusion. Each rejected offer was just more proof that I was lost in my own fantasy, and the admiration that once existed curdled into pure contempt. Then came the cruel phrases, "You will never be anything." "I made a mistake marrying you." She no longer saw sacrifice or a vision for the future. She only saw a failure who refused to accept reality. And I, more and more, found myself alone in my own fight. The chasm between us grew swiftly. I still dreamed of seeing my company become the winning lottery ticket for our life. But for her, I was already just the burden of a mistake. It was in that void that distance became disdain, and by the time I realized it, there was no turning back. And before I continue, tell me something. From what city and country are you listening to this story? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and become part of our family, because what happened next will leave you speechless. The routine at home devolved into a cold, heavy silence. I would arrive late, exhausted, believing I was fighting for our future. She would greet me with cutting glances. She never asked how my day was. She didn't care about my achievements. She just repeated that I was wasting time on an illusion. Sometimes I tried to show her reports, graphs, projections. I spoke of meetings with investors, of new technologies we were developing. She didn't even bother to hide her boredom. She would listen out of obligation, sigh loudly, and cut me off with a cruel remark. While you dream of numbers, I deal with real bills. I knew the results were slow to come, but I also knew we were making progress. It was a slow process, but it was real. The problem was that for her, every month without $1 million profit was just more proof of my failure. She compared me to successful friends, to husbands who already had assets, travels, luxury cars. I was the shame of the list. What destroyed me most were the comparisons within her own family. Her brother, who had opened a clinic, her cousin, who worked at a bank. They were all examples she used to wound me. Look where they've gotten, and you're still here, believing in that garage level company. Her words cut deeper than any debt. It was in this climate that she sought a lawyer. I found out because certain papers started appearing around the house. She said they were just precautions, but I knew better. She no longer spoke of a future with me. She only spoke of division. What was hers? What would be mine? One day, during dinner, she said it without a hint of shame. I've already spoken to my lawyer. If we ever separate, you get to keep that little company of yours and a pittance from the account. The rest is mine. That's what's fair. It wasn't a discussion. It was a sentence. Right there, I realized divorce wasn't a distant possibility. It was a plan in motion. And the more I stayed silent, the more she advanced. She would roll her eyes when she saw me working late. She said I couldn't read reality, that I had rejected buyout offers that could have saved us financially. In her view, I wasn't a man of vision. I was just a fool squandering opportunities. I clung to my dream as if it were the only thing I had left. I knew that giving up would mean proving everyone who called me a failure right. But deep down, a question hammered at me. Had she already made her final decision? Because days later, the answer would come. And it would be nothing short of devastating. The weeks turned into a minefield. She no longer spoke to me as she once had. Short answers, long silences. I would come home late from work and be met with excuses, endless meetings, new friends, commitments that had never been mentioned before. It all felt strange, but I clung to the hope that it was just a phase. Her phone became a fortress, always face down, always locked with a password. If I entered the room suddenly, she would lock the screen in an automatic gesture. When I questioned her, she said it was my paranoia, but the unease grew, along with the silent certainty that something was wrong. Still, I tried to focus on my work. I showed her reports. I spoke of new offers coming in, of the technologies we were developing. She pretended to listen, but her eyes were always somewhere else. And when I spoke of the future, she would just utter phrases like, "You live in a world of illusions." One night, I came home earlier than usual. The table was set for two, but she wasn't there. Hours later, she walked in without a convincing excuse, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. When I asked, she answered with irony, "It's funny that you're suspicious, when the only betrayal here is what you're doing to our life, insisting on this dead company. It was the first time I heard the word betrayal from her lips, not as a confession, but as an attack, a cruel reversal of roles that left me speechless. In that moment, I understood that something deeper was already at play. The divorce wouldn't be a sudden decision, it was only a matter of time, and that time was about to run out. After so many inconsistencies, I knew I couldn't deceive myself any longer. Her excuses didn't add up, her schedules were a mess, and the silence between us only grew. I decided I needed answers. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to ask for a divorce. I wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered, before she laid her cards on the table. During that period, my company was testing an intelligent monitoring system. It was a tool that cross-referenced geolocation with contact logs, a prototype still in development, but functional. I knew it was risky to use it for something personal, but it was my only chance to discover if my anguish was paranoia or reality. It only took one night for the data to start screaming. She claimed to be at a work meeting, but the system showed a different destination, a restaurant downtown, known for discreet encounters. The tracking repeated itself over the following weeks, always the same place, always the same times. It was no coincidence, but the final discovery came when the system aggregated information from phone numbers. It was one of our technology's experimental functions, identifying contacts that appeared across multiple databases. And there it was, a familiar name, someone from our social circle, a man who attended some of the same events as us and had always shown an overly polite interest in her. The impact pierced me like a blade. It was no longer a suspicion or a vague fear. It was a certainty. My wife was already in another relationship, and the divorce wasn't a request she was thinking of making. It was a finished plan, just waiting for the right moment to be executed. In that instant, the irony was crushing. The very company she despised, the one she called an illusion, had just given me the proof I needed. The startup she claimed was worthless had opened my eyes. And there, with the truth laid bare, I understood that the game was about to change. Because when she finally announced the divorce, I already knew exactly who I was dealing with. The atmosphere at home became unbearable. It was as if every meal was a rehearsal for the end. Until, one Monday night, she dropped all pretense. She waited for me to finish eating, pushed her plate forward, and said bluntly, "I want a divorce." The words echoed like a gunshot, but unlike what she expected, I didn't react with despair. I looked her straight in the eye and remained silent. She mistook my silence for shock. In truth, it was control. I already knew everything. I knew who she was spending her nights with. I knew why our marriage had turned to dust. She opened a folder of documents with every detail already reviewed by her lawyer. "You get the company and 30% of the amount in our joint account. The rest is mine. The apartment, the car, the financial investments. This is what's fair." She spoke like someone who had already won a dispute, as if our fate was sealed. Inside, rage was burning, but I showed nothing. She needed to believe I was just the defeated man, resigned to losing everything. As she delivered her speech, I remembered the nights my system had shown me their meetings, their messages, their betrayal. Every word she spoke was merely confirmation of what I had already discovered on my own. When I finished looking through the papers, she crossed her arms and delivered her final shot. It's better to just accept it, Alvaro. I've told you before, you never knew how to seize an opportunity. She didn't realize what she had said. She didn't realize that in that one slip, she had practically handed me his name. But I already knew. And that gave me a strange sense of power. She believed she had beaten me. She couldn't possibly imagine that in that exact moment, fate was beginning to turn in my favor. At dinner, there were no shouts, no arguments. I closed the folder of documents, took a deep breath, and said only, "I'll speak with my lawyer. We'll formalize whatever is necessary." She seemed relieved, as if she had won without a fight, and that only reinforced her blind confidence that the game was over. 2 days later, I walked into my lawyer's office. I placed the papers on his desk and got straight to the point. "I want you to register it exactly as it is, without contesting a thing." He looked at me, surprised. "Are you sure? You're giving up almost everything." I nodded silently. There was no room for a fight. My focus was elsewhere, on the company she called dead weight, and I saw as a gold mine. And success seemed more tangible with each passing day. While he prepared the paperwork, I buried myself in the routine of the startup. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind. Meetings with investors, final technology tests, discreet conversations about a possible acquisition. It was as if, suddenly, the world had decided to prove that I was right not to give up. The divorce was signed. The agreement was airtight, leaving no room for future disputes. In the weeks that followed, she celebrated. Her lover was no longer a secret, and she felt victorious, as if she had stripped me of everything. Little did she know, she was sitting on a ticking time bomb, about to explode. The negotiations moved quickly. Contracts were drafted, clauses discussed, numbers adjusted. I barely slept, not from despair, but from the anxiety of seeing my vindication become a reality. And the closer I got to the signing, the more I realized accepting that divorce was the best decision of my life. Because in a matter of days, the company she despised would be sold for a sum that would change my destiny forever. The negotiations moved faster than even I could have imagined. In less than 3 weeks, we were looking at a contract that felt like a dream. A multinational tech corporation wanted my startup. The price? 92 million. The payment would be in Bitcoin to facilitate the international transfer. It was the fastest and most secure way to shield the transaction from any dispute. There would be no bank, no freezes. In a few hours, the millions would be in my hard wallet, untouchable, irreversible. To many, it would sound risky, but for me, it was perfect. The divorce was already finalized, and this way, there was not the slightest chance she could ever get her hands on this money. I received the transaction in several digital wallets and immediately transferred everything to my hard wallet. Private keys recorded, secure, untouchable. I signed the contract with a steady hand. In that moment, the life she had pronounced dead was given a new breath. It was the greatest irony possible. The company she despised, the one she called a failure, had just made me a multimillionaire, and she hadn't a clue. Meanwhile, she was showing off at dinner parties on Alvaro's arm, telling everyone she had rid herself of a burden and was now finally with a man who had a future. I just smiled to myself because revenge, just like the Bitcoin in my wallet, was safely stored away, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. And that moment would arrive far sooner than they could have ever imagined. Months later, she and Alvaro were married. The wedding was a lavish affair, filled with friends, champagne, and the incessant flash of cameras. On social media, they paraded themselves as the perfect couple, and every time someone asked how I was, I would answer calmly, working, as always. But what few knew was that I no longer needed to work. My wealth was growing silently, protected in cryptocurrency, untouchable. Meanwhile, her new husband was drowning in debt to maintain the lifestyle she so desperately demanded. His company relied on fragile contracts, inflated by appearances. I watched it all unfold in silence. She believed she had won. Alvaro believed he was on the rise. But the truth was, they were both building a house of cards, and I was already setting a gentle breeze in motion, ready to bring it all down. I used my most valuable asset, information. My contacts in the tech market, data my own company had accumulated before the sale, and the knack for being in the right place at the right time. Nothing illegal, just intelligence meeting opportunity. I uncovered inconsistencies in Alvaro's company, cooked books, inflated promises to investors, contracts with no solid foundation. I discreetly passed this information to the right people, and little by little, the trust in his name began to crumble. When the banks saw the hole, they cut his lines of credit. When his partners realized the lies, they canceled their contracts. And in a matter of months, Alvaro's company, once a rising star, was plunged into unpayable debt. She, who had paraded at dinners and parties, began to disappear from the photos. The same friends who had given them standing ovations vanished. Invitations were rescinded. The high society she so revered had slammed its doors on the couple. And I, in silence, simply watched the castle crumble. Alvaro tried to fight it. He sold cars. He tried to get loans. He tried to attract new investors, but the market no longer believed in him. His name became synonymous with fraud, and his reputation sank along with it. She, who had once called me a failure, now faced the very contempt she had forced me to swallow. The luxury apartment was mortgaged. The trips were over. The smiles on social media turned to silence. I never had to raise my voice. I just had to push the right buttons, and my revenge was complete. It all happened in broad daylight. Legal, clean, and final. They had dug their own grave. I merely showed the world where the shovel was. Today, I walk the streets with the certainty that my revenge is absolute. My company is sold. My wealth grows, secure, and every contract signed in my name is a living reminder to her and Alvaro of their colossal mistake. They know it was me who leaked the information that sank his empire. And the marriage that began in luxury is now a battlefield. Debt erodes what little they have left. Dinners have been replaced by collection calls and accusations. She, who called me a failure, now lives with the irony of seeing her man of the future mired in bankruptcy, while I appear in business magazines and features on prosperity. It wasn't luck or fate. It was me. I pushed the right buttons. I showed the right people who they really were. And with their every fall, I savored the victory that was stolen from me long ago. I didn't just survive. I buried them with their own weapons. This is true revenge. To see the traitor and her lover together, but without money, without status, without reputation, without respect, and without peace. Their marriage is a daily reminder that they traded gold for cheap costume jewelry, and with every bitter glance they exchange, I know I am still there, the ghost of the choice that destroyed their lives. Look at the irony. She traded the failure for the man of the future, only for that future to arrive in the form of debt, arguments, and slamming doors. Meanwhile, the failure she discarded planned every step, sold his company for millions, and was single-handedly responsible for burying their house of cards. Today, they argue about money, and he toasts in silence, not with bitterness, but with the satisfaction of one who had the last and loudest laugh, with a crystal glass and a full bank account. In the end, betrayal has a price, and those who betray always pay dearly. And you, listening right now, if you were in his shoes, would you have forgiven them, or would you have done worse? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to become part of our family and follow more stories of betrayal, revenge, and unbelievable twists.